Fantastic. Thank you so much. So welcome to students, to fellow colleagues, and to anybody else who might be participating in this DL learning event. I'm really honored and privileged to be amongst you all this morning and to engage in what you will find to hopefully be a really purposeful and meaningful learning event. From the outset, I would really like to invite students to participate and interact with me because I believe that learning is something that is really a process of engaging with one another. And so you will see at the bottom of your screen that there is an icon referred to or called chat. And if you have any questions or queries or comments, I would really appreciate if you could type and post them there. And then Simon will support and assist me to see the kind of chats and the kind of questions and queries that students or fellow colleagues might post during this 45-minute session. And I will do my best to answer them the best way that I can. But I would really like to hear from you. The whole purpose of this session is to provide support for our students and to be able to work through sections or units of content that are really orientated at enabling you to succeed. And so I would really appreciate if it's not only me speaking for the next 45 minutes, but if you really do take the forum and the courage to make your voices and perspectives heard, that would be most greatly appreciated. And then just for students in the CRP102 DL cohort, I am representing today on behalf of Mrs. Knoll, who is the MC and the lecturer for CRP-DL for the first academic semester of 2020. And she's currently on maternity leave. She had her baby boy, Timothy Aaron, yesterday. And so on behalf of all of us, we wish her warm congratulations. And we have no doubt that the time ahead will be really special and precious getting to know your third baby boy. So I know that she's wishing you well for the remainder of your studies, and she has entrusted me today to take you through the focus of today's session. So with that being said, what I thought would be a good way of moving forward today is that looking at the kind of concerns and issues that students readily generate, one of the kind of aspects that students seem to want support in is the idea of lesson planning. And understandably, we acknowledge that one of the greatest tasks of any educator involved in the schooling sector is to be able to do lesson planning and to plan lessons that are educationally sound, that are rigorous, which means that they really are thought through particularly well, because we know that lessons are really at the foreground, or at the center of what we do as educators, and it helps teaching and learning come alive in our classrooms. So the focus of today's session is going to be lesson planning. And so I'm going to start with a PowerPoint presentation that looks at why do we do lesson planning? In other words, what are the benefits of doing lesson planning? And then we're going to look at the reverse, that if we don't do lesson planning, what might the effects of poor lesson planning or no lesson planning be? And then in the middle of the presentation, I'm going to then show you and work with a Word document and showing you what the template, what the format of a lesson plan looks like in Stadio School of Education. And then finally, towards the latter part of the presentation, I'm going to work through an exemplar lesson plan with you. So we're going to look at what a lesson plan should entail. We're going to then look at the structure of an actual lesson plan. So what are the different parts of a lesson plan? What does it include? And then to help you think about how applying your learning, we have selected the theme of the senses, which we know is really imperative for young children. And we're going to look at how to design a lesson plan on that specific theme. So please do join in with me. You're able to ask questions at any time during the session. And as I said before, there is a tool that is labeled chat. So please feel free to post your questions, queries, and comments, and we can then answer them and we can discuss them further. So I would really like to engage in a dialogue with you and really be able to help you build your own understanding of the importance of lesson planning. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you. Just one moment. Simon, if you could just assist here, I have pushed share screen, but it is not allowing me to select what to share. So it doesn't bring up the PowerPoint nor the different Word documents I have open on my computer.
Okay, Kerry Lee, does it let you just share your normal screen?
It's just got my screen, and then it's got a whiteboard and an iPhone or iPad option.
Okay, let's just try sharing the screen, and then if you can then move to the PowerPoint, let's see if that works.
Okay. Is that visible?
Yes, I can see your slides. And do you want to go present and go full screen?
Okay.
If you want to, if you want to start the slideshow, just you can click from the beginning button. That's right.
Okay, there we go. Thank you,
Perfect.
Simon, for your support.
That works.
Excellent, fantastic. Okay, so as I said today, the area of focus, we're going to look at planning. And I always think that a good starting point or a good stimulus for discussion is to think about why do we plan? So what is the importance of planning? And one of obviously the most important reason for planning is to allow effective teaching and learning to take place. So we're going to look a little bit about the value of good planning, and especially in our context in early childhood education, one could argue that planning is really at the foreground of what we do. So very often, people think, well, children are so young, and so you don't really necessarily need to plan or need to think carefully about your teaching and learning. But actually, the reverse is actually true. Because your children are so young and because they come with a myriad, which means a range of different ideas to the classroom context, planning is essentially that much more important. So we're going to look at the reasons for good planning. We're also going to then look at the aspects of good planning. In other words, what do we need to consider in making sure that our planning is suitable, that it's meaningful, that it's purposeful, and it also intends to achieve and meet the kind of learning outcomes and assessment standards that we want to achieve within our teaching and learning. And then finally, as I referred to earlier, we're going to look at lesson design. So we're going to look at the structure of a lesson plan and especially the different phases, which includes the introduction, the development phase, and thereafter the consolidation. So we're going to look at what each of those phases of a lesson plan entails or what each of those phases includes. And so I would like you just perhaps to take a moment or two and just consider why each of you might think that planning is effective. And I think it would be quite nice in building up a community of a practice, in building up a kind of dialogue and discussion for you maybe in the chat forum for you just to list maybe one reason as to why you think that planning is important. So I'm going to give you just perhaps a few seconds just to think about and then jot down why you think that planning is important, because I think collectively then we can come up with a more robust set of reasons, a justification as to why we do planning, especially in early childhood and in the schooling sector at large. So I'm going to give you a few seconds just to think about that, and then in the chat forum to list the different ideas that you may have. Okay, I will go back and I will look at your commentary if there is any. So let us look at and just very briefly examine the value of planning. Okay, so one of the most important things is that planning allows us to view teaching as a process rather than a one-off end event. What that means is that when we plan, we really get to understand that teaching works like a cycle. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. But it is also a process that is dynamic. In other words, teaching and learning is something that is continuous. It is something that is dynamic. It is ongoing rather than it being static, a kind of start and an ending process. So teaching and learning is continuing all of the time. When children come into the classroom, they already have experienced something in the home. They could have experienced something on their way to school that they want to share with you as their educator as a point of inquiry. How did this happen? Why did this happen? And very often you can use that as a stimulus for examining something in more detail. So planning is really important because it helps us to recognize and appreciate that teaching and learning is a never-ending process. Okay, the value of planning also allows us to make very thoughtful selections about what we do in the classroom. So if we are planning, we're thinking really carefully. So planning is like a thinking tool. It helps us think about, well, what are our outcomes? In other words, well, what do I really want to achieve in this lesson? What do I want the children to be able to do? Perhaps to know, to be able to do, and the kind of values that I want them to have acquired by the end of a particular duration of time or at the end of a particular learning activity. Because if I don't have outcomes, if I don't have something in mind that I want the children to achieve, that will then not allow learning to be meaningful, because I'm not going to have anything to work towards. I'm not going to be able to ascertain or determine the level to which my teaching and learning was effective. It also allows us to carefully select our content, and that is what is the kind of knowledge or the kind of understanding of the world that are wanting the children to be able to explore and discover. What do the children already know about a particular topic? What do children not know about a particular topic? And how can I use what is already familiar to them to try and expand their world, to try and expand their body of understanding, to expand their skill set in helping introduce them to something that is slightly more novel and less known. It also makes us think about our teaching and learning strategies, and that's really important. And one thing to emphasize is in early childhood education, we really have to understand who are our children and how do they learn and how do they best function and how do they best operate. And if we know that children primarily learn through play and learn through movement and learn through activities that are participatory and that are active driven, that then allows us to carefully select strategies that are going to best match how young children learn. So in our teaching, we don't want our children to be passive, which means we don't want them to step back, and we want to fill them with understanding. Rather, we want our children to be active. We want our children to build their own understanding of knowledge, of what it is that we are presenting. And so the teachers have to say, well, how can I be playful in my teaching? What kind of strategies can I use? Song? Can I use rhyme? Can I use, for example, storytelling? Can I use dramatization? How would I get children to learn alongside me in the activity that I present? And so the value of planning is really important because it provides us with a thinking tool. It lets us really consider very carefully what we choose to include in a lesson and what we choose not to include in a lesson. And it also provides us with a justification, a set of reasons that help us feel determined and also help us feel good about the decisions that we are making. So when, for example, we have to perhaps explain ourselves to our other colleagues, to stakeholders, including parents, HODs, school personnel, etc., we have a good set of reasons which gear and support us in the decisions that we make. Okay, the value of planning also allows us to come up with novel. By novel, we mean new and innovative ideas. So through planning, which also includes research, so researching ideas, researching resources, researching content. How, for example, can we get children to understand, for example, the theme under the ground? Should I take children on nature walks? Should we look at the bottom of a tree trunk? Would the route be showing for the children to explore? You know, would children be able to discover how animals, for example, use the under the ground as their homes, etc.? Okay, planning promotes teacher confidence. So if you don't plan, you don't have a guide, you don't have a structure to work towards. And that can make one feel less confident. Oh, I don't know what to do. What happens if a child asks me this particular question? What happens if the lesson plan doesn't go according to plan? And so if you don't have a lesson plan or a tool to work from, then one cannot easily grow in their confidence. So lesson planning really builds teachers' confidence. It enables us to present lessons with determination, with commitment, and with confidence to say, I can do this, I can manage, yes, I can. Lesson planning also helps us manage constraints more effectively, which includes how do we work with space? How do we work with time? How do we manage our resources most effectively? And I'm sure we can all relate to the kind of constraints and limitations that many schools and classrooms within a South African and also international space finds themselves. We don't always have adequate space. We don't always have adequate time. We don't always have an ample supply of resources. And so if we plan carefully, we can really make best use and utilize what we have around us. Okay, so then the reverse, the opposite is also true for poor planning. If we have no planning, then it leads to aimless teaching, which means there is no intention, there's no direction, and then there's no specific learning value for the children or outcomes. So we really don't lend itself to kind of say, well, I'm really glad that I offered children this learning opportunity. I know that it's really valuable because either it's going to offer them new knowledge, or it's going to help them develop or practice a particular skill, or it's also going to help them acquire certain skills for life, like patience, respect for others, waiting my turn, being able to be tolerant, respectful of others' opinions. If I don't plan, I cannot be assured that the learning experience I'm offering young children is of any value. Okay, if we don't plan, then we can't be assured, we can't ascertain, we can't determine whether or not we offer children developmentally appropriate and culturally responsive learning experiences. So if we don't plan, we can't say, well, I am cognizant of the children's needs. I really know what the children know and where they need to go. planning provides us with no way of determining whether we have provided high quality teaching and learning for children or not. Okay, as I said earlier, if you don't plan, it doesn't necessarily allow a person to actually have high confidence, and as a result, it leads to demotivated children and leads to increased disciplinary problems. Okay, so what then are the aspects of good planning? And ladies and gentlemen, in our student cohort, this really relates to the different segments, the different aspects of a lesson plan, which I'm going to show you a little bit later. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to just stop there and allow you to pose any questions or comments that you might have, and then I can attend to those as well.
EBD, no questions thus far.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, so what makes a good plan? What lends itself to a really good lesson plan? Okay, the most important thing is having a specific focus. Okay, very often what we do in lesson planning is we want to cover too much in too little time. And instead, it's really about saying, I'm going to select something that has a very specific focus. And the content area, the theme, and the topic that is selected is going to be guided by our knowledge of the national curriculum and of the curriculum and assessment policy statement. So that is the one that we are going to be referring to, especially as it relates to the foundation phase, which includes grade R from the reception year up until grade 3. So you will use that document to become familiar with the content area, the theme, and the topic. But it's really important. I just want to signify and emphasize this for the student body, that it's really important to select a key focus and to have that focus run through, as Karen Norday said in her previous presentation, you want that as a thread. So what you do in the introduction must be carried through to the developmental phase. And what you do in the developmental phase must be carried through in the consolidation. So for example, if I'm working with the content area, let us say, or perhaps even before that, let's say I'm working with the subject life skills. And the specific content area that I'm going to be working with is beginning knowledge. Okay, that's my content area. The theme that I'm going to select within that content area is my senses, so the 5 senses, the way in which children make meaning of the world, and I'm going to select the topic of what are my senses and what do they mean to me. So that is my focus. I'm not going to focus on any other theme or topic, but I'm going to carry the theme of my senses and the topic of what my senses are and what they mean to me throughout the lesson that I am planning. Okay, aspects of a good lesson also has well-intended learning outcomes. So it's always a good idea to have no more than 3 to 4 outcomes, because that keeps it specialized and it also allows it to be more manageable. Okay, our outcomes should also always be aligned to our understanding of children. So what do we know about children? How do we know that they learn? How do we know that they function? And the specific learning outcomes that we choose should always relate to what we know about young children. Okay, the third point is really important. The learning outcomes should always cover 3 main things. That is the knowledge. Okay, what do we want children to be able to know? What do we want children to be able to understand at the end of a particular lesson or activity? What skills, what abilities do we want children to be able to acquire? For example, listening, memory, recall, to be able to question, to be able to concentrate, to be able to observe. So you can think of a skill as a tool that children are using in order to be able to learn. And finally, outcomes should cover values and attitudes. Those kind of things that we want children to acquire, they can be thought of a life skill. So for example, if we're holding a discussion, do we want children to learn to have patience when it's their turn to talk? And when it's the turn of others to speak and I need to wait my turn? Is it to be able to appreciate different opinions that are heard? Is it for children to be tolerant of others? If it's, for example, we're dealing with our senses, we want children to have a healthy sense of self. Oh, these are my senses, and these are what the senses can do. So we want children to have a healthy self-esteem. We want children to have a good level of self-confidence. So when you are doing outcomes, always think about those three key things: the knowledge you want children to acquire, the skills you want them to develop, and the values and attitudes you want them to attain. Okay, outcomes should also include the what and the how. By that we mean, what do we want the children to acquire, and how are we going to help them acquire that knowledge? So I'm going to show you that in the lesson plan a little bit later. But what is identifying what it is we want the children to achieve, and the how is recognizing the process through which they are going to achieve the what. So for example, a learning outcome is, I want children to develop the ability to listen by taking turns to share their opinion of the story that was presented to them. Or I want children to be able to know about the different senses by being able to use each of them in the lesson I present. So there must always be a focus on what do we want the children to achieve, and how are they going to achieve what we want them to achieve in the lesson we present. The outcomes should be specific, they should be measurable. In other words, if I put something forward, how am I going to know the level or extent to which children have achieved them? They must be time limited. So in the specific activity I present of 15 to 20 minutes, what is reasonable? What is realistic for children to achieve within that particular time frame? And obviously they must be relevant. They must be relevant, aligning to my content area, to my theme and my topic, and also relevant to the children. And so I've just provided a list at the bottom there of the kind of outcomes we can have. So children can be encouraged to list, differentiate, tell the difference or similarities between two sets of items or two sets of objects. We might want them to learn to identify, to recognize things around them. We might want them to create, to develop something new. For example, in an art activity, or if we go back to the idea of the senses, we want them, for example, to create binoculars, a tool for them to observe more keenly or more astutely and grasp, explain, and understand. Okay, so the aspects of good planning continued. Okay, one part, and then I'll show you again the lesson plan. An aspect that you really have to consider as part of your lesson plan is, what assessment strategies am I going to use? What types of assessment, and what are my tools going to be? Now, we know in early childhood that we use informal assessment, and our primary assessment tool is that of observation. We really use our keen sight of seeing to help us notice what it is children are thinking. What is it that children are feeling? What is it that children know? What is it that children are most curious about? And so when we say types, we use mainly observation, and there's different tools. We can use a checklist. Was, for example, Tabo able to identify the senses? Was he able to recognize the function of each sense or not? Is he able to label each of the senses on his own body? Or is he able to label the senses on, for example, a poster or a picture? So we can use a checklist, we can use a narrative tool, and a narrative tool is writing out exactly what children say and what children do in any activity. What's really important is to make sure that our assessment strategies align with our learning outcomes. So if you have a learning outcome of I want children to identify the different senses, the 5 external senses of the body, I then have to match that with an assessment tool. And say, for example, I'm going to give children the opportunity to label each of the 5 senses of the picture. If they're able to do that, I can then assess the extent through which my learning outcome was achieved. Yes, the child can identify the senses. Yes, the child is able to explain what each of the different senses does and how it allows us to function in the world. Or, no, this child seems to be struggling with understanding what the different senses are and how we use them. And hence another learning opportunity to reinforce that knowledge is necessary. It's also important to include accommodation and inclusive strategies. So what happens for those children who experience learning or developmental barriers? What do we do to help include them in the lesson? It can include visual difficulties, hearing difficulties, language barriers. So one must always think about how to create an inclusive classroom. What can you do to invite and encourage children who struggle to participate? What kind of differentiated strategies can you put in place to help children mitigate, to overcome those challenges that they experience to access the teaching and learning that other children may be able to? Sample questions. Questioning is really important because it not only enables a teacher to ascertain, to see how much children know, but we know young children have a wonderful sense of inquiry and a wonderful sense of wonderment. And you know, I'm sure you can relate, students, that what is the question that children ask the most is why? Why this? But why? But how? But why this? But why does it function in this way? And so questioning is a wonderful way of building children's inquiry, in promoting their sense of inquisitiveness, and also providing insight for us as educators to know how much children are understanding and are gaining from the activities we present. We then look at obviously the semi-structured lesson plan. So a lesson plan should have an introduction. What does the introduction do? It should set the scene. It should promote the prior knowledge of children. So what do children already know? What are they coming into the classroom knowing? And remember, even though we're working with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, children carry with them life experiences. So it is our responsibility and obligation as teachers to be able to determine, well, what do children already know about their senses? How can I use that as a foundation to take them further and to create something novel for them, something that they might already not know, to enhance their understanding and build their language, build their vocabulary about things that are not known. The body then should provide detailed steps about the activity you are presenting. So, it should be sequenced. It should say, okay, first I'm going to do this. Second, I'm going to provide this interactive activity for children to use, and so on and so forth. So your body should be as detailed as possible. That if you're not teaching the lesson, another teacher should be able to take that lesson and be able to conduct it in a very explicit, which means in a very clear way in the classroom, because you have provided adequate detail. That doesn't mean you must just throw everything in and then be repetitive. It must still be clear and it must be well sequenced. The children must first do that, then that, thereafter that. And then the conclusion is about how do we reinforce learning? So how do we go over what was covered in the body and make sure that children have a good, solid understanding of what was presented, and also to enhance. You know, it's a wonderful way of saying to children, what did you like about the lesson? What didn't you like and why? So we teach young children to also be reflective, to be introspective, to look inside themselves and say, well, I like this because, but I really didn't enjoy this part of the story because. It allows children to exercise their voice and also provides us with a tool to be reflexive. We then have a reflection, which we'll look at a bit later. And then we also have our referencing. So for any research we did that I spoke of earlier, or any resources that we use, we really have to be able to make sure that we reference correctly. Okay, so this is what the lesson design looks like. Okay, I'm just going to go through these slides quickly because I'd rather show you the Word document. Okay, but what is important to notice here is you do your student name, You'll then enter the date on which you're presenting the lesson and the grade. What grade are you teaching? And for us in early childhood, you can also amend that to age group. So are you working with younger group, 3 to 4, middle group, 4 to 5, or older group in grade R? The subject that you will get from CAPS, which you would have already covered in your study guide, and that is obviously home language, mathematics, or life skills. What is the content area? So now that's subdivided from the subject. I have my subject, then within the subject, remember I said right at the beginning that a focus is really important. By selecting a content area that and the lesson topic or focus, that allows you to really be particularly focused. So as I said, we are going to focus on beginning knowledge and personal and social well-being. And the particular topic that we're going to use is my body, the 5 senses and their functions. And you can see in the next column, the CAPS page that I'm referring to is number 31. Okay, so that just shows you an outline of the different content areas. And within each content area, the specific, within each subject, I beg your pardon, the different content areas. So maths and the 5 content areas, language and the 4 content areas, and life skills and the 3 content or study areas. And this is available on the ECR forum for you, and it's also available in the CAPS document which you have privy to. Okay, so I'm going to exit there and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to share another document with you. Okay, share screen. Okay, so this is what the template of the lesson plan in Stadio School of Education looks like, okay? So it has your student name, that's where you would put your name as the student and your student number. The date, okay, that's the date, as I said before, when you are presenting your lesson. Okay, circle group A or B, so which group are you in, week A or week B? Okay, the grade, are you doing grade, if it's in foundation phase, grade R, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. But as I said, for us in early childhood, this also pertains to younger group, 3 to 4, middle group, 4 to 5, or older group, 5 to 6, which also is equivalent to the grade R reception year. Okay, the subject, remember, it is language, mathematics, or life skills. The content area, you would insert in that space over there. The lesson or topic focus, for example, my senses, and then the CAPS page number. So I'm just going to scroll through. This is the different aspects that a lesson plan entails. So the different structures of the lesson plan. You then have lesson objectives or outcomes, where I said what is going to be the knowledge, skills, attitude, and values you're going to include, the methods of assessment, and then these are the different aspects, the different parts of a lesson plan you're going to focus on. So lesson introduction, lesson development, sample questions, level 1, 2, and 3, according to Bloom's taxonomy, lesson consolidation, so how you're going to conclude the learning, an enrichment activity, learners needing special attention, your resources, reflection, and then references. So let us now look at a lesson plan that we have looked at completing to help guide you about how you would do a lesson plan. Just before I start looking at that, are there any questions or comments that anybody would like to share?
No questions yet, Kerry Lee.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, so let us look at this lesson plan, okay? So the date, the 24th of April, 2014, and according to CAPS document, I'm focusing on term 2. Okay, you can see term 2 over there. Okay, circle group, I've just selected A. Okay, and I'm focusing on 4, just as an example, grade 1. Okay, I'm not going to do, I haven't selected to work on the subject language, so I'm going to leave that block unchecked, but I am focusing on life skills. So you can see I've indicated there through a tick that I'm focusing on the subject life skills. Okay, within that subject, remember I have to have a particular focus. So what content area am I going to focus on? The content or study area is going to be beginning knowledge and personal social well-being. Okay, so first the subject, then the content area. And then I have to be even more focused than that. So the lesson topic or focus that I'm going to focus on is going to be, as I said, my body, okay, is the theme. Okay, that's the broader theme. And the topic within that theme is the senses and their functions. So now before I even go with completing the rest of the lesson plan, I'm really wanting to go and research. What are the 5 senses? What are the different names that they are called? Why is studying the 5 senses important? What do the 5 senses allow me to do? How can I activate each of those 5 senses to learn about the world? And I'm going to consult children's books. I'm going to consult children's literature. I'm going to consult Google and obviously reputable sources. I'm going to resource different images of each of the different senses. The eyes, which is visual. The ears, which is auditory. The sense of the skin, which is tactile, the sense of touch. The sense of smell, which we call olfactory. And the sense of taste, which is the use of the tongue, which is called gustatory. So that's the focus of my lesson. I'm going to explore the 5 senses with young children in the grade 1 classroom. Once I've done my research, then I can really think about, okay, what's my lesson objective? What's my outcomes? What do I want to achieve with this particular lesson? Okay, and remember, I'm focusing on knowledge, what children must know, the skills, the abilities children must use, and the values and attitudes. Okay, what are the kind of norms? What are the kind of social cues I want children to acquire by participating in this lesson? So remember what I said before, there must be a focus on what and a focus on how. Okay, so let's look how each of those are included in this particular outcome. Okay, so always focus on the what and the how. Learners will be able to identify the following parts of the face: nose, ears, eyes, and mouth. So can you see that's the what? That's what I want children to gain. And how? I'm going to say by singing a song on the senses and labeling the different parts of the face. Okay, so what do I want children to be able? There's my keyword. I want them to be able to identify the different parts, identify the following parts of the face: the nose, the ears, the eyes, the mouth, because each of those external organs link to a sense. And how do I want them to do that? By, that's the how, singing a song on the senses and labeling the different parts of the face. Another outcome, another achievement I want to adhere to by the end of the lesson is to ensure that children will know the functions of the 5 senses. That's the what. What do I want children to know? The functions of the 5 senses. And how do I want them to achieve that? Through discussing or explaining what each of the senses can do. Okay, so by discussing, discussing or explaining what each of the senses can do. So it's just going to take a little bit of time for my computer to save the changes, but again, you can see they're focusing on what I want the children to do and how do I want them to achieve that. Okay, the next part that we looked at, okay, is the method of assessment. So how am I going to assess? How am I going to know the extent to which these outcomes have been achieved by the end of the lesson? I'm going to question the children and ask them if they understand. Okay, and I'm also going to use observation. So I'm going to see which learners are able to identify the different parts of the face, which children are able to explain the different functions of each of their senses. Okay? The lesson introduction, I'm going to sing a song. So can you see in the outcomes I've said here, I'm singing a song, and I'm making sure that I include an opportunity for children to sing in the lesson. The learners will sing the song head, shoulders, knees, and toes, and I'm going to sing that song repeatedly and softly completely with no sound, so only showing children the actions, and I'm going to get them to do it along with me. Okay, so already there I can assess which children know the parts of the body and which do they not. Okay, in the lesson development, okay, I'm then going to focus on each of the senses. So remember, the lesson development, okay, is when you are going to include specific detail and logical steps about how I'm going to help children learn about the senses. So learners are asked to repeat a part of the song. Learners are questioned as to which part of the body the eyes, ears, nose, and mouth belong to. And can you see that that relates to an assessment outcome? So everything is matching. My outcomes link to my assessment links to my activities. Okay, I'm going to then blindfold each child and give a picture of a facial feature. And I'm going to do similar to pin the donkey. I'm going to ask them to pin a sense on a piece of paper or on a large poster for children to use. Okay, then as part of the developmental phase, I'm going to discuss each of the 5 senses. So taste, I'm going to get children to stick out their tongues. What does the tongue help them do? It helps them to taste. The tongue has tiny little taste buds that lead to different flavors on our food. So namely sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. So that's new knowledge that I'm introducing to young children. And I'm also going to tell if something is crunchy or smooth. So our tongue is able to tell us about texture of food, not only, for example, of how something tastes, but how something feels. Is it crunchy, smooth, crackly, etc.? And also temperature. Is the food hot or cold? So I'm going to do that the same for seeing, I beg your pardon, for hearing, for smell, and for touch. Okay, so remember that's the body of my lesson. I'm focusing on each sense. Then at the last part of my lesson, I'm going to show learners the flashcards again. So now I'm showing them words. Remember, children think in pictures first. So we use pictures in the body of the lesson. Now I'm going to use words, and I'm going to point to the words and make sure that children are able to identify each of, first by pictures, the different senses, and the words that are associated to those pictures. Then, because I want children to engage actively, as part of the end of the body of the lesson, I'm going to give children an activity. They each will be given a magazine and an activity sheet, and I'm going to ask learners what's missing from the face. I'm going to give them a face, but I might not have a nose, I might not have ears included in the picture, and children are going to have to work through a magazine, a child-appropriate magazine, and they're going to look for the missing parts. So find a nose and stick it on the face that we give them. So we give them a blank template, and they're going to create a face with the 5 senses from the magazine that we give them to use. Okay. Remember, questioning is really important. You would have done questioning already in the study guide, and this is also available, Bloom's different levels of questioning on the ECR page. But who had something crunchy to eat like an apple would be level 1, we call remembering. Level 2, can you explain, understanding why bees need to see in color? And level 3, which is a higher level of cognitive demand, creation and understanding. What do you think is important for a buck to be able to move the outer part of the ear? Okay, for a consolidation, remember the conclusion, and that can be to reinforce understanding, to clarify what children didn't understand, and also, for example, to recap, to go over something that perhaps children didn't get as best you thought they could have. Okay, so I'm going to remove the labels, ask learners to come to the front and place the labels in the correct place on the poster. So can you see I'm using the thread of the senses in the introduction, singing, for example, head, shoulders, knees, and toes. I'm using the senses in the body where I get children, for example, to discuss each of the senses. And I'm using it in the activity where children get to, for example, build up a face of the senses, and in the consolidation where they're now going to use the words to label the face. Okay. Then finally, learners needing special attention, perhaps you can think about, if you were to present this lesson, how would you accommodate children, for example, who might be partially sighted or might not have English as their first language? These are all the resources. These are the resources that I'm going to use to support my teaching and learning. And then after my lesson, I'm going to reflect. What would I do differently next time and why? So what worked well? what didn't work well and why, and how can I improve on my teaching and learning the next time. So that's what a sample lesson looks like. I will place them on ECR for you to have another look at, but I hope that you found this to be useful and just to provide you with some insight into the value of lesson planning, the aspects of lesson planning, and how we go about planning a lesson. So I wish you all the best for your studies, and please feel free to either contact me if there's further questions, or use the ECR portal to discover how challenging yet promising lesson planning can be. I see that there are no questions, and I think I've reached the end of my time and a little over. But if there are any questions, you can continue to post that on the forum on ECR, and I will make sure to get back to you. So Simon, for now, I think that's it.
Kirili, thank you so much for a very informative session. You covered so much there. You even had someone like me enjoying and learning about how to be a teacher. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. My absolute pleasure.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for your very supportive facilitation. It wouldn't be possible without your support. So thank you kindly, and thank you, colleagues, and I wish you a blessed and happy rest of your Saturday.